Hello, and welcome to the Weird Waves podcast. My name is Taylor, and this is episode 60. On this week's podcast, we are talking to the guy who was on episode 6, Jacob Kelly Quinlan. This is a really cool episode. It was really interesting to look back at our first episode together. It was over a year ago, and see how much things have changed for him, for me and Andre, for the podcast, and the world. It was nice to look back on that. And in that original episode, we had talked about doing a part 2, doing a more technical type of interview about river surfing. How would you find a river wave if you were going to find one? All of that stuff. And this was really fun. It was a nice collaboration. It was out of my comfort zone because it's just a little bit of a different format for interview for me. It was just super fun and really, really interesting and super informative. I know you guys are going to love it. And the other thing I wanted to say is Jacob has a new video coming out. It will be coming out, if you're listening to this on Monday, it will be coming out Tuesday, October 27th. And I will have that link in the description as well. So here's episode 60. I know that you guys will love it.
I'll just wait for that to install. So how's everything else doing? You moved. Did you move like cities or you just moved apartments or something?
Just within the city. Yeah, I got a new place. Yeah, totally turned into an adult. Got married. Got
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Congratulations.
Hey, thank you.
Oh my gosh, that's crazy.
Yeah, it's pretty weird to have a Corona wedding, but it was nice and small, which is good.
I bet. What was that like?
Yeah, so we had to keep it under 50, so we tried to keep it to just 30 people and just did it in the park. It was really nice, really chill day, which is surprising. Like that was what we were going for, but I think we actually pulled it off, which was nice.
That's so cool. When was that?
September 12th.
Oh, wow. So recent. Oh my gosh. Yeah. Congratulations. That's so cool.
Yeah, thank you. What are you guys? Are you guys engaged or thinking about it?
Oh, we've been married. Andre and I. Yeah. Andre and I have been married. Our 4-year wedding anniversary is next month.
Amazing.
So, cool. Yeah, it is cool. I think people do assume that we're like boyfriend and girlfriend because we're so young, but yeah, we got married at like 23 or something. We were crazy.
Nice.
We just were like, let's get married.
Go for it.
Okay. So far, so good. But yeah, that's so cool. And man, I had a secondary question. I forgot. So you got married and you moved. I'm assuming you moved in together. That was your move, right?
Yeah. Just a place that was like both of ours, which is nice.
That's nice. Yeah, that's cool. That's very cool. So I actually looked, I was looking on the dates for our podcast together. Let me just pull it up. Our first one was episode 6, and it was September 3rd. So it's been over a year.
Holy cow.
Since our first one together. That's so crazy.
Yeah. It seems like it wasn't that long ago.
I know. That's what I was telling Andre too. And so much can happen in a year.
Yeah.
It's like crazy. I was re-listening to that episode and the audio quality was like not the greatest, but I would say by episode probably just a few after years was when we really kind of like figured out our style of editing and how we want things to sound and how we want the flow to be and all of that stuff. So
that's cool. Mm-hmm. Congratulations on 60 episodes. That's impressive.
It's really cool. It's really cool. We got into a little bit of a funk, I'd say. I think everybody did, just with COVID. Yeah. It kind of like changed. What we found was the people were they used to listen to us as a part of their routine, which is awesome. But then when the routine gets interrupted, then you kind of like forget about those aspects of your routine. So that's why, like I was telling you about the video aspect, we started doing that. So we kind of took like 5 weeks off, and I went back and like turned any video that we had old like saved videos into like edited YouTube content
Cool.
and put that out. And we had another person recommend us to do like a clips channel.
Yeah.
So kind of go back through old episodes and get, whatever, like Jacob Kelly's advice for this thing. And it's,
Just a clip. Yeah.
yeah, just like
That's smart.
10 minutes or 20 minutes long. And
Yeah.
so yeah, it's we're definitely back in the groove of things now. It's
Right on.
cool. Yeah.
That's good.
Yeah. So
That's a great project to bring you out of a funk too, because you like revisit all these good memories and like it's almost a time capsule to when things were happier.
yeah, definitely a time capsule. I think also too, like, you look back and it's weird because with this weird time or this weird like 6 months, it's like it feels like it was so long ago and yet it was only a couple months ago. But like beaches were closed. Our beach was closed when we first moved to Florida.
Yeah.
So everything about surfing seemed like people didn't know, is it dangerous? Like, can we do that safely?
Yeah.
Kind of all that stuff. So now I think everybody is kind of in a little bit of a better space with everything. So um I know me personally, my passion for the project has been reinvigorated, so that's cool.
That's good.
Yeah.
Yeah, I feel like time sort of slowed down too. Like the day just wasn't as packed full, like, and it was more like getting news updates and things like that, and it kind of slowed things down. So like that 6 months was felt longer, but
Yeah.
it's like a separate part of my brain now. Like that whole COVID thing, it's like that chapter.
Yeah, so are you guys maybe talk about what your location is, just in case somebody hasn't listened to episode 6, and just give us a rough overview.
Yeah, for sure. So up in Canada, I live in Calgary, and that's just outside of the Kananaskis Provincial Park. So that's where we do most of our surfing. But it's nice because that river comes off of a reservoir, and there's a power dam. So our river surfing happens pretty much year round. Like we have to deal with ice a little bit. So when it first comes off, there's like our river pretty much turns off. Like it's like a dry riverbed. It's pretty crazy. But all this ice forms around the sides. So when they turn the river back on, it like flushes all this ice down. It takes about like, I don't know, 30 minutes, and then all the ice gets flushed through. And then we've got our awesome surf wave. So like, yeah, I try not to go below minus 15. I don't know what that is in Fahrenheit, but like 15 degrees
I don't know.
lower than zero for us. But it's pretty cold, and it definitely gets colder than that. And we've gone out with days like that, and I don't know, like yeah, the risks get much higher.
It's 5 degrees. 5
Okay,
degrees Fahrenheit.
not quite zero for you.
No, but still, I mean, it's cold.
Yeah. And it's nice at that temperature because the water still stays warm. Like if you've got a good wetsuit, like and even like you don't need the thickest wetsuit. Like you'd think you'd need to go for the 7 mil, if they even 7 mil. But as long as you don't have any holes and the wetsuit kind of like keeps the water out, it's actually really warm because the water's around 32 or zero because it can't get any colder. Otherwise, it'd be ice.
It'd be frozen.
But the parking lot, like getting changed
Oh,
and
yeah.
having a wetsuit, that's the worst part. Yeah.
So what thickness of wetsuit in that condition are you using?
Like for me, it's only a 5'4". It's
Oh,
a five.
wow.
Yeah. And that's a little bit different. Like I think a lot of people here are using a 6'4".
Mm-hmm.
But sort of through the years, my wetsuits have gotten thinner and thinner. Like even in the summer here, I'm kind of like I'll have an hour-long session in board shorts, and everybody else is still in a 4'3". I just kind of got acclimatized to colder water. Maybe killed some nerve endings or something.
Yeah.
Like
Or you're like Wim Hof, right?
yeah.
He's the guy that does all the cold water stuff.
Yeah, I think he has some breathing exercises that I don't have, but that kind of thing.
You're the river surfing Wim Hof.
Yeah, not quite.
So is it different, maybe the cold factor, because like on the lake when we were surfing, I was usually in a 5'4" as well.
Mhm.
Only because me personally, I would rather be colder than lose the flexibility that a 6'4" kind of, for me, it just put me over that threshold of feeling too like
Constricted.
constricted. Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
But that was kind of unusual. I would say that most people were wearing like 6'5s.
Yeah.
But for us, because it's wind swell, the
Yeah.
water isn't what's cold. It's like kind of like what you're saying. Like, of course, the water's cold, but it's the wind chill. So, like when you see the ice beards and everything, that's not them being in the water. That's them when they come out of the water, and the air is so cold and the wind is so cold that it'll freeze on your body. So I'm wondering, um, because there's no wind swell for the river, is it like more protected areas mostly, and that's why it's
Yeah, our wave, it's in a mountain valley. So it's kind of
Mhm.
like we've got a mountain in front of us, trees on the other side of us. So there's one wind direction that will like come straight down the river. And those days are really, really hard.
Because it's
Like
so
that
cold.
-15 rule doesn't apply anymore.
Mhm,
Like even below zero gets really, really cold when you have the wind.
mhm.
So I would say like I would almost avoid a windier day before avoiding a cold day, which is crazy because you guys, like on the lakes, it has to be a windy
It
day
has to
to
be a
have
windy day.
wind.
Yeah, that's right. And you know what's interesting too is that even in Florida, it's pretty similar. I've
Yeah,
we're kind of learning, definitely this last month we've surfed so much and
yeah.
just learning the differences there. But in Florida, you unless it's like like remnants of a hurricane swell, you almost want this combination wind and groundswell because
Yeah.
it almost needs this like choppiness for it to have any substance in a way.
Hmm.
Like you need a long board for their cleaner waves is what I'm seeing. But on days when, like, if you check Surfline or Magic Seaweed, it'll say poor conditions because it's like 20 knots offshore, like onshore winds, not
Yeah.
even cross, but straight blusting onshore. That's when there's a bunch of surf shortboarders just absolutely ripping because it just gives it a little bit more of an edge rather than this like clean gliding wave.
Yeah. Absolutely.
And in
Um.
Florida, they need the size is an issue. At least where I'm in southern Florida, so it might be different, like more north, but at least
Mhm.
where I'm at, they need it.
I've never seen anything like surfers wearing anything to like be a windbreaker or anything like that. Are wetsuits pretty good at cutting the wind, or does it still get through the neoprene? Like, I've seen stand-up paddleboarders have like a sort of it's not right. It's not exactly a windbreaker. It's still neoprene, but it's like almost has like sort of a thin layer that will cut the wind. Is there anything like I just don't see anything like that.
No, but there's that patch like right on the front
Hmm.
and back that is that different material. So
Yeah.
it's that instead of the more flexible neoprene, it's a
Mhm.
more solid layer.
Yeah.
So that blocks the wind at least in your chest.
Hmm.
But I don't know, maybe I just don't notice it just because like I can't remember being like the wind is the issue that's, making
Hmm.
me cold. It's just kind of the whole thing is cold and you're just cold the whole time.
Yeah, for sure.
You know, like
Yeah.
it wouldn't
And
be like gust of wind would, extra cold. It
you're
wasn't like
just
that.
cold.
You're just cold, and then if by chance you wipe out too intensely and water kind of gets inside of your hood and like flushes you out, then you're like cold, cold, cold.
Yeah.
That's like, oh boy. It's like I don't know, eating too much ice cream all at once.
Brain freeze.
Yeah, brain freeze for sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
Um,
And at a certain point, you must start to like sort of love the wind too. Like if that's the source of the waves, it's almost like you grow an appreciation for it.
yeah, when we were surfing the lake, and for lake surfers, it's definitely like that. They only look at the wind charts. So it's all about wind charts and the kite surfing websites and the NOAA reports and stuff like that. Where like the last time Andre and I were surfing before we came here, it was Andre's like, oh, it's just Lake Michigan, like in Florida. It was like, oh, we know exactly how to surf this. You know, it's like you just kind of get smashed for the first however many, first meter basically till you get out the back, and then there's something kind of rideable, and that's just not that much
what
different.
You're used to.
Yeah, it's kind of like a welcoming, like, oh, here.
That's cool.
Yeah,
it
it is.
had like a head start on someone if they came from like California or something, surfing perfect waves. You're like, no, we got this.
Yeah. The only thing, the buoyancy has been pretty weird. I don't know, maybe you get that too, right? Because yours is freshwater as well, right? The rivers are all freshwater.
Well, we would change boards, right? So in the river, it's all like EPS epoxy,
Okay.
and they float really high. And like in the ocean, I think the most common is like a surf tech or swell tech or something like that. But I've been on one of those boards in the ocean, and it floats way too high. It feels weird. You know what I
Yeah,
mean?
like a torque. Have you seen those torque boards?
I haven't, but it's definitely like I'll switch to an ocean board, and it's almost like a perfect balance, right? When you go to like a polyboard in the ocean, that's kind of the same sink that you get in the river on an epoxy board. So yeah, that's weird. That's interesting. I do know guys who take their river boards out to the ocean. I should ask them if it's a weird adjustment.
Yeah, I would be interested to see that, because I find that the board that I was riding the most on the lakes is kind of like, it's not what I need, It's like there's something like kind of off. We've since found some other boards and stuff. Actually, I find that I'm wanting a little bit more rocker for whatever reason. I think that at least where I'm surfing, because of the tides, can really affect the size of the wave, where we didn't really have that on the lake. It was just kind of like the wave will like eventually just go away.
Yeah.
There was no like it's going to get bigger with the pitchiness is going to increase or decrease with the tides. So I'm finding like moderate float and more rocker is kind of what I'm into for right now.
That's one of my favorite things about surfing, though, and like bittersweet, like love and hate, is just like the quiver of boards of just like, and like being able to blame the board that day. Like I'm having a terrible day. It's got to be the surfboard.
That was me the last day. That was me, like right before we left as well, because I was so I have like a short board. I have a 510, which is what I brought with me from New Zealand. And it's a great board, and in those prior wave conditions, it had like just enough volume that it could really be a wave for kind of a board for every sort of wave, except for really, really small. And then the thing I have next up is an 8-foot board. And so I'm finding that I'm gonna get something kind of in the middle, maybe like a 6'4", something beefy, but beefy enough that I can catch it. So what I was doing when it was bigger, like last week, is I was taking out my 510 and basically just practicing, like getting like my duck diving skills, which kind of got away from me. I wasn't surfing smaller boards on the lake, and just kind of getting out the back. And then the size on the report was supposed to go down a little bit. So I brought out on this last day my longboard, my 8-foot board, and well, the wind, I didn't check the wind. So the wind made it pick up in size along with the tides. And it was just a joke. It was just an absolute joke. And I was like, it was just so ridiculous. And Andre had his fish and he was having the time of his life, right? Because he has a 5'8" fish. It was like way out there, and it's amazing. And I was just getting absolutely maggoted in the front. My board is too long. So, what are the differences that you look for in the board, like when you're river surfing? So, are you guys like switching fins out and messing around with buoyancy and rocker and all that stuff too?
Yeah, so sort of in the beginning, when more and more people were coming from the ocean to the river, it was like you would just take your ocean board in there. the shape of a river wave is interesting. It kind of like goes down before it goes up. Like there's an inslope to a wave,
Okay.
and then goes up that you don't have in the ocean. Like the ocean is flat, and it picks up the wave. So in front of you, it's flat. But in a river, you need a drop.
Okay.
Like the water has to go down before it kind of goes up. That's actually what makes the shape of the wave. So a
Is the
lot of
drop.
yeah, so the it's this weird thing, like you know how water fills its container? Like if you have a glass of water and you tip the glass and it stays sort of level,
Mhm.
that's what the whole river is doing. So it's like you're kind of tipping the whole river bottom and it's filling the shape of its glass more or less in the way that it can. So that river wave is like sort of the whole river picking up to meet where the front of the drop is, like where it starts to go down. It's like trying to get back up to meet that. You know what I mean?
Mm.
It's kind of hard to explain, but what ends up happening is the area in front of you where you're surfing starts to move up like a slope.
Mm.
So if you have like a lot of the waves in Alberta that I'm surfing, for example, if you have anything over 6 foot, like even a 6'4", like will catch that inslope and like just totally nosedive you every time. So like most of the river waves, even if you wanted to take out like an 8 foot board or 9 foot board, like the typical board you learn to surf on, it won't even fit in the sort of the area that we have to surf. So it's kind of hard as a beginner coming into the river. You
Mm-hmm.
don't have those like those days where you just ride the whitewash in on a straight line on a huge board. Like we don't have that luxury, I guess, to sort
Okay.
of get that board sense. So what ended up happening is the boards would get thicker and wider, like you know the mini Simmons shape.
Yeah.
So if you can picture a mini Simmons, it would be similar like that, and then take an outline out of that. So like, or like a retro fish, like the really thick, like from the 70s, 80s sort of retro fish, where they still had the thruster fin.
Mm-hmm.
But like I've seen guys with boards that are like 4 inches thick,
Oh
and
my gosh.
yeah, like they're just like we're trying to get in. So like I've seen boards that are less than 6 feet long that are still like 40 liters. You know what I mean? Like 40 liters is a big board,
That's a
right? So
huge board. Yeah.
yeah, so like they're just packing it in. But that's sort of what you need when you're starting out because it offers a lot of stability. Um, and the way that the river goes, it's also not so uniform, I guess. Like if you were surfing behind a boat, like in wake surfing, that has a very similar shape. Like the wave is a little bit smaller. It's planing really fast. Like the water underneath you is moving really fast, but it's not a huge wave. Whereas like on a mushy small day in the ocean, the water it seems like it doesn't move as fast. You know what I mean? So this is like a fast moving wave, but it's a little bit smaller. But in the river, it has all these irregularities. It's not mechanical like the boat. So it'll just like you'll be like I've seen beginners in the we call it the pocket, like you're in the part of the wave that's going to hold you, and you're about ready to stand up, and then just poof, like it just
It
flips
just.
you or it just takes you. You know what I mean? So our boards, so cutting off sort of the front of the board, you still want a lot of like planing surface, sort of like a longboard or a mini Simmons. So it's quite flat, not a lot of rocker, and then really thick, and then that kind of makes these fatter rails and everything. So that offers a lot of stability in the beginning. So when we moved from like sort of these like potato chip surfboards like what Kelly Slater had, like we had those on
Yeah.
the river, to these like really massive, thick, like 40 liter, like chopped nose kind of things. I think we're starting to like find sort of a riverboard now, and a lot of it's coming from Europe, where they've been surfing in Germany for just about 50 years now, and same kind of thing. Like they were just cutting the nose off ocean boards, and they now have their own shapers. They're making river specific boards, and now like in Bend, Oregon, there's a shaper there. There's a shaper here in Alberta. Like I think it's like everyone's starting to tune it out. So it's a little bit thicker, but definitely not 4 inches.
Yeah, we had the guy from Cubicle Surf. He was on the podcast.
Got it.
He
Yeah.
was Travis, that's right. He was a really really interesting dude, and he's doing some really cool stuff with those boards.
Yeah, he's definitely pushing the edge. So the other thing to look for in a river board is like something that's stronger, right?
Uh-huh.
That can take some impact because like we've got a lot of rocks out there.
Right.
And for Bend or Munich, they have concrete walls. Like you're surfing in between concrete walls, so it's very easy for that board to just like slam into like a slab of concrete, which isn't happening in the ocean.
Right. Well, I mean, yeah, for the most part, you're right.
There's
Unless you're
definitely rock
surfing
reefs
under a
under a pier.
pier. I surf right by the pier, so I've
Okay.
seen some pretty yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So yeah.
I've seen some crunching happening. But
So that kind of thing.
yeah, but you definitely have the hazard is higher for you guys than yeah. So I'm curious about the beginner to intermediate transition. So
Mhm.
for specifically like ocean surfing or even lake surfing, you kind of when you start, you stand up, go straight on the whitewash, then you try to get out the back and you paddle into the energy of the green wave before it breaks, or you know, you hit that inside as it's crashing to hit the green part of the wave and kind of turn on the angle. So for the wave, is there multiple sections? It seems like they all have kind of their own style, but to me, I guess I'll talk it out for someone who hasn't seen a river wave, my
Mhm.
perspective of it, and then we
That'd
can
be
break
great.
it down.
I want to
Okay.
hear it. Yeah.
Okay, so my my perspective of a river wave is like that in between break. It's not an A-frame wave. It's kind of like a corner, like a point break almost, where it's crashing on one side and then it's like an open green wave on the other, like going out in this like weird triangular way. Does that
No,
how
no,
does
no.
that work?
That's good. Like, and there's a lot of different river waves, but like that's what we're looking for, right? Where
Okay.
you can have like sort of a broken wave section and a green wave section, and it has like all of the pieces of your experience surfing, like from the paddle in to the pop up to like going between the pocket and the green face and going back and forth in between those. If you can find a river wave that has all those pieces, then you can recreate that sort of surf experience.
Mhm.
Whereas there are smaller river waves that might just be, it looks more like after the wave's broken, like riding in whitewash.
Okay.
So yeah, those would be that would be the kind of river wave that you would build, right? Like a crashing side and a big
Okay.
wide open green face. Yeah.
And are
And I
you
think
finding Yep.
yeah, sorry, with the progression from the beginners.
Yep.
So I would think that it's almost the exact same thing,
Okay.
but it's kind of hard to see it unless you know what you're looking for, like how you just broke down a river wave into its sections with like sort of whitewash green face. That's really good because I think that's happening. And we now have people coming to river surfing that haven't learned how to surf in the ocean. Like they're just like this is the first surf experience they've ever had.
Interesting.
Yeah, so they don't see it in those pieces, right? It's a completely new experience to them. But we have the beginners will learn to stand up, and then they almost get stuck where they're only riding straight. Like the
Mhm.
river wave is maybe 10 feet wide, or hopefully a lot wider, like up to 30 feet wide for a river surf wave. But they're sort of stuck in this one spot. And then, so that's just like riding the whitewash. And then you get the wiggle, and then they're like kind of like moving left
Yeah.
and right, but it's more of a wiggle. They're not putting in carves. And then you'll see it in beginners when I would say that switch when you could say they're intermediate or like they're well on their way is they actually you'll see someone look up away from their board or look up off the water
Okay.
and then start looking for their turns. So they'll start
Mm.
looking down the line. And I think that's the same in the ocean, right? Like as soon as you can kind of look down the line and the real intermediate to advance is like you're looking before you're turning. You know, it's kind of like
Yeah.
yeah.
No, that's perfect. It's interesting too. I wonder how I'm trying to break it down for myself too, because for beginners to intermediate in ocean or lake surfing, it's kind of, okay, I'm getting out past the whitewash. I'm catching, I don't know, 3 out of the 10 green waves that I'm going for, and I'm still, because you can still catch the green wave and only angle.
Mhm.
I'm riding the angle. I'm riding the wave, and then kind of that step into the intermediate is starting to do, okay, I'm doing a bottom turn, and that's when people maybe focus less on tricks per se, or they want to rotate boards around and try different feelings in that way. I think the hardest thing is the transition from how do I paddle into a green wave and like make the drop into it, from the top of the lip all the way down into the surfable part of the wave, um, and not fall,
Yeah.
versus the kind of stand up, go straight, or even stand up and turn, on like this whitewash.
Yeah, for sure. And I think if you're looking at their turns and when they're starting to ride the angle to when they're doing the turns, I think if you look at where their chin or where they're looking and where what their shoulders are doing, that's sort of like that's where I help beginners in the river or like someone who's asking me for some help. That's usually where I have to get them to make that leap of faith or like sort of get out of their rut or their funk is
Mm-hmm.
you really got to start looking around and start moving your shoulders first. I think that's what happens with the wiggle is they want to turn and even like have you ever watched a video of you surfing or like seen like photos and stuff?
Only a couple, yeah.
Yeah, it's harder in the ocean, but in the river, like it's like right there. Like people pull out a cell phone and then so something goes up of you on Instagram and you're like, oh, that doesn't look good. Like you're
Yeah,
doing the wiggle and you think you're doing like these big like Mick Fanning turns, hard carves, and big spray, and then you look at the video and you're like, oh, that's like a
just
wiggle,
wiggling.
you know. So it's sort of like yeah, body that like sort of compression and extension where it like whips your lower body, like your hips are turning, and then you're really turning it, but it starts with the upper body to get that twist.
I'm curious as well about how I'm not exactly sure how to frame this question, but I think you'll see where I'm going with it. So
Okay.
I'm curious how the community or what the interaction is like while surfing is going on. So to compare again with ocean surfing, there's no one really to tell you what you're doing wrong unless, like, if you're surfing with your friends and they just rode a wave in and then you rode a wave in right after them, then they might see something that you've done wrong and they can tell you and correct you. Where
Mm-hmm.
what I'm seeing in the videos of river surfing is that people are kind of taking turns in the wave, and there's tons of, maybe not tons, but there is people on kind of either one side of the river or the other side of the river, or they're standing in the water. It seems like there's more availability to coach or be coached. And is that kind of a part of river surfing?
Oh, absolutely. Like without a doubt. So our arena, if you could call it like that, or like our playing field is completely different in probably that aspect alone. Like the because the wave is stationary. Like a lot of guys, like I started seeing this. I never did this, but they bring out a GoPro and just put it on the rocks next to the wave and hit record, and then they go and surf. And I was like, "Whoa! I've never seen a surf video. Like you're not making surf videos. What's up?" And they're like, "Well, it would be boring. It's just like a static shot." Sometimes they post like a good ride or something like that. But the advantage of being able to do that and then taking that GoPro home and watching your rides is amazing. So um, the coaching stuff and all that kind of stuff is happening maybe less than that. Like we do, it's crazy because you're standing in line. Like you actually wait in line for your ride, standing watching the person in front of you. So in the ocean, when your buddy gets his wave and he surfs in and you're like see the back of his head pop up and down, maybe like you don't really see the ride. In the river, you're right next to them. Like you can surf over and give a high five if you wanted. Like that's how close you are. So I think we get a lot of like surf clubs or crews, we would sort of call them. And it's like a group of people who would surf together, like interchangeably, like you always go out with your bud, but surf crews sort of happen and they kind of coach each other and supply advice to each other. And then you have like these rival crews, which is kind of cool. That happens a lot in the river, and it's all in good fun. Like I don't think we are getting into the area where there's like territorialism or localism, that kind of stuff. But it is interesting that like you'll be able to recognize a crew and they're sort of like helping each other, but they're not helping everyone.
Okay.
And you got to kind of read the person who's out there, because like if I just started like offering advice to everyone out there, not everyone's going to take it too.
Yes.
And some people, they're when they're first learning it's really actually hard to have that many eyeballs on them, right? Because people are lining up on either side and there's a GoPro on the rocks and all this kind of stuff. It like actually like
It's
increases
intimidating,
yeah.
right?
So it changes it on both sides. So there's like pros and cons of our surf environment for sure.
And what is something that's kind of like a no like bad etiquette that someone's gonna think, oh, whatever, like, snaking or something like that.
We don't get a lot of snaking.
Right, right.
Like it does happen as a joke. Like
Yeah.
I've
I
got
just
guys
mean
that
like an equivalent, if there's something like that.
so the biggest thing with standing in line and having like that, like standing in such close quarters, like being right next to the person that you're surfing with, I think it does change the environment to the point where you're sort of all in the same boat. Like you do want to have a positive attitude. You sort of treat others like how you want to be treated. That's how I can sort of tell if somebody wants advice or coaching or anything like that, because a lot of surfers will be a little bit more stoic and like focused on their surf, and they're kind of there to get their reps in. And then others are asking people like for advice and like chat, like a little bit more chatty in the lineup. And then others are just goofing off. So it's kind of whoever's in the water, that energy is sort of contagious, right? Like you can almost see two people come down, like because you walk down the riverbed and say there's 6 people surfing, and there's sort of an energy amongst the guys and girls surfing at that time, and then these two like characters come down, and it like completely changes the energy. Yeah. And that happens in the ocean too. Like I've definitely experienced that where like I'll paddle out and I'm just in a good mood, and like, sometimes the wait's kind of long, so I'm like singing and like trying to do like a backflip off my board. Like it can definitely change the energy, but you're just so close to one another in the lineup that I think everyone's a little bit more aware of how their energy does affect it. So if you were to like snake someone or like do something to cross someone in the etiquette of the river surfing, then you got to go line up right behind them, and then it's like tension's way too hot, right? So it doesn't happen as much. We had this one guy come down, he just ocean surfer, all he was familiar with was ocean, and he's a good surfer, and we get that a lot. They come down with maybe a little bit more of a cocky attitude, and then he thought one of our like locals who's like been around, he knows what he's doing, he thought he like snaked him or something, and he got really pissed off at him. And then like they had a bit of an exchange, and he was kind of like, hey man, like I didn't mean any, trying to like make things better. And this guy just kind of huffed and puffed and like stormed off, like he just like took his ball and went home, sort of thing. It's like, okay, well now next time you come out, like you're gonna be the guy who like like stormed off, right? So it's this I guess the community is a little bit tighter. Like you're not seeing them from like one break to the next break so far that you can't recognize them. In the lineup, you're as close as a handshake, sort of thing. So it does bring people a little bit closer together.
What happens if like most of your waves, I'm assuming that a lot of them are a little bit more remote, or there's like a specific, like, this is a river wave park, right?
Yeah.
What about those in the middle places? Like, are you meeting like hikers and like, I don't know, boaters, or I don't, something like that?
So I would call them wild waves. I think that's
Wild
because
waves. Okay.
it's kind of a hard, like we're still like creating the culture and like figuring out what the language is. So I don't know, somebody might call it something else, but you have, like you said, like Bend, Oregon,
Hmm.
that's a whitewater park that has a wave. And now
Okay.
they're looking at like making wave parks that's like, the whitewater park was built by kayakers for kayaking, and now you like surfers are like, we just want a wave. So it's you got a wave park, and like you take a section of river and you just build a wave, right?
Hmm.
So there's these wild waves that are like everywhere. It's insane how many of these things exist. Like I've been searching these for like the last 10 years. I discovered that these things are a lot more frequent than we know, and it's quite possible that it's only like a certain time of year, usually in spring when there's like all the snow is melting down from the mountains and the rivers pick up. And so you have this swell that like happens in the middle of a river somewhere, and you have this like beautiful wave. And this thing could be breaking somewhere in the world right now, and like no one's surfing it because they just don't know it's there. So we have like this whole community of like wave hunters. They're like sort of going out and trying to find these wild waves. And the community that around these wild waves is, it kind of varies from wave to wave, but the way to sort of like the early explorers, we'll say, of these surf waves are actually kayakers, or I would call like the paddling community. So these are anybody who is in a boat with a paddle or stand-up paddleboard, who are going from, they're like paddling a whole section of river, and through that like float down, they get to see all aspects of the river. And it's really cool. Like I've seen like whitewater rafting is a big example. Like the rafts, they've got like 10 people in them, and they'll actually like spin around and like paddle into a wave, and they'll like catch a wave on the fly in a whitewater raft, and the guide's like on the back, like he's the surf fins, right, like
Right.
ruddering, and everybody's just kind of like surfing a wave. It's crazy. So this whole surfing thing has happened in rivers for way longer than anybody thought to be like, hey, I should take a surfboard out on there. Like it's been happening for a really long time, and they have their whole community around there. And so you can, I think in the late 1990s, like kind of 2000s, this whole movement of freestyle kayaking had this like sort of explosion. And I think the boats changed shape or something. They got a lot shorter.
Hmm.
It actually like mimics sort of this mini Simmons shape
Yeah,
where
and they have this kind of waterproofing thing that goes around their stomach, right? So that water doesn't come into their kayak.
they call it a skirt.
Yeah, the
Yeah,
skirt.
yeah, for sure. Then, so when that happened, they started the sort of waves that they were looking for were more what we would look for, like a surf wave, right? And their culture is a little bit different. They would, I think, call it rodeo wave or play boating or freestyle kayaking. But if you go on the internet and you know what to search for with like rodeo or play boat or things like that, you can find some amazing waves, and like it's gnarly. Like it's like some of these rivers are pretty crazy and turbulent, and it's not like you can just walk up and jump in and surf the wave. Like you have to have some serious river skills. But this whole community like exploded of uh, and a lot of these kayakers were coming from whitewater rafting. Like they have river experience, they're not coming from ocean, like a completely different playground and trying to find a wave like we are. They were already in the rivers, and they might be like, hey, remember when we did that run in July? Do you want to go back there in May and when it's really huge and see if we can find some waves? So all these like sort of wild waves were starting to be pinned by these kayakers. And then there's like endless amounts of YouTube footage of kayakers like surfing waves and like doing crazy stuff. Like they do way crazier stuff than we do, like, full barrel rolls, corkscrews. I don't know the names of it, but these have become sort of like our allies in finding riverways, this whole community. And Like I try to be as nice to the kayakers as I can, even though it's like that skier snowboarder
Oh yeah.
sort of rivalry sort of thing going on. They're like, oh, these surfers, like no respect for the river, and they don't take safety seriously enough. But meanwhile, they know where all the good waves are, sort of thing.
You gotta be friends with those guys.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, because they know that's so if you were to try to find a wild wave, what are you looking for? Like the example I think of was like I was talking to my parents last night about this interview today, and my parents are looking for property or have been looking at property in West Virginia. And there's a big Ohio River, and the property they're looking at kind of cuts through, and it's a massive, it would literally be like we're going wave hunting. So if someone was to go wave hunting on property with nobody there, first of all, what are you looking for? And second of all, if you see something that looks like what you're looking for, is there a way to enhance or like cultivate a wave that a regular person could do? You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I think so.
If you I hope that you can feel where I'm going with these questions. They're not exact. They're just really kind of coming out.
Yeah, I'll do my best to try and guide
Okay.
it. And if I get off track, or like this is like my favorite thing to talk about. So if I just get too stoked and the coffee's taken over, just like bring me back
Okay,
on track.
okay. Sounds good.
Um, so the Ohio River, is it?
Yeah.
So to just like be like, oh, here's a river, I'm just gonna go walk the bank. Like that would be sort of just buying a lottery ticket and hoping for the best.
Okay.
If you have a piece of property, then yeah, definitely go do that. But I think the search, like wave scouting, we're maybe not starting by just walking the bank, more or
Right.
less. Like there's a certain set of conditions that you would want to look for in a river. So the first thing I would sort of look at is just get on Google and see sort of what the river looks like. And there's some like lingo that you might need to pick up, or like there's ways to read like there is like swell charts and wind charts that you're most familiar with. So we look at flow data. So a river is measured in its volume of like how much river is passing by a gauge. Like there's like a little sort of like a thermometer, but for flow sitting in the river, and they have these set up all across the world. Like especially in the United States is really good at it because I think it's the army, like the naval engineers, or I forget what it's called now. I should know this because I look at their charts all the time, but like it's actually really well set up. And this is really important for tracking flooding. So if anywhere is going to flood, these gauges are really important to like give a heads up. If we got a ton of water coming, so a lot of time you'll have a huge snowfall, and then you have this like flash flood rain. So normally when the snow comes off the top, it's like a regular year of spring runoff. But if the rain gets down under the snow and it just like takes all the snow down at once, and the snow and the rain is hitting the river, that's when you have flood conditions. This is also really good for surfing. Like typically,
So
if
flood conditions are ideal, or a place that has certain types of flood warnings is something to look out for.
uh, yeah, sort of, kind of like
Okay.
flooding conditions are dangerous. Like when you see flood advisories, that's probably not when you want to get in the river. But like
Okay.
typically in a river, if you see a feature that's going to create a wave, when
Hmm.
you add more volume of water, it sort of gets better and better and better. If that
Okay.
makes sense.
That makes sense.
So if let's talk about the set of conditions that you need. And we already touched on this a little bit, but the river needs to go through a drop, right? So you need about 1 meter, like you need about 3 feet of that river to hit a point where it just kind of like goes down. So if you were to look at the river online and you're looking at pictures, and this thing is like this really wide river that almost looks like a lake that's kind of like moving pretty slow, and there's not a lot of drops in it, it's going to be really hard to find a wave.
Could you find this by looking more like at a topography type of map, so it would kind of show like levels of depth and height?
You absolutely could, if that existed.
Okay.
Right? Because if you were searching for mountain peaks that you wanted to hike or like kind of go up, then I think that exists. Like topographical maps, like that's how maps are made. But they don't have that for river bottoms, right? Like you would have to send sort of some kind of probe down the river that like does echo sound location. Like mapping river bottoms just isn't a thing like it is making maps of mountains or terrain. Does that make
Okay,
sense?
it should be, yeah, because that's what I would think of.
Yeah, then yeah, you could find waves easily, right?
Yeah, yeah. Just
Yeah,
turn on a Google Maps with the Google Images, the topography version, and have it go down, and you say,
yeah,
"Oh, there's a wave."
yeah. There you go. But there are some cheats that you can use to try and find maps because there's definitely wave hunters who are using Google Maps to try and find waves.
Mm-hmm.
But what they're typically looking for, so you'll be able to see that drop in a river on Google Maps because it's like green or brown or whatever a Google Map river looks like, and then it has a section of white.
Mm.
So this is why you want to kind of track down the whitewater rafters or sort of like the kayaking community because that's what they're looking for. Long stretches of water that we call whitewater. But if you're looking at a Google map, it's like you can see rapids just
Mm-hmm.
Google satellite image, right? So in that section of rapids, just because there's whitewater or rapids doesn't mean there's a good surf wave, but that's the best place to look, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then another thing to look for is all across North America, around the world, they have these dams that they've built. And this is usually like it's called a low head dam, but it's just sort of it backs all the water up and then it just flows over. And this can be extremely dangerous, or it can be like a really good surf wave. And there's different technologies to be able to build these dams, but typically they've been built for pulling water off the river to do irrigation. So if you have this big, wide river, typically you're not going to find whitewater. But if there's like a lot of farming in the area, they'll be building these low head dams that backs the water up. And then when the water hits that point, there isn't a natural drop. The low head dam will create that drop. And then there's like a side channel. So water will come off and that goes out to water the farmers' fields. And then you have this extremely fun or extremely dangerous thing that's stuck in the river that's making that happen, right? So those you have to be careful. You have to know what to look for. But when that water flows over the Lowhead Dam, you'll get a lot of bubbles. Like it creates turbulence in the water. And if you watch the bubbles and they're moving, like they go over the dam and then they're moving back towards the dam, like a river runs one way, right? And when a river runs the way it shouldn't run in
It's
turbulent
dangerous.
water, what happens is you're gonna go like you're gonna get stuck in there. Like you're not gonna be able to have an exit.
Okay.
Right? And what's happening below the surface is it's called a weir, but it's just like a revolving door of water that's just sitting there. Like you can throw a stick in there and you just watch it like bob up and down. You're like, oh, that's you, right?
Yeah.
And these things are actually it's terrible thing that they're actually like people are dying in them, and it's just this old technology that exists there and there's thousands of them that are like these things, and we're just taught stay away from them, stay out of the river if there's a dam there. But it's also a great place to like put in a new structure that would still divert the irrigation water, so the farmers would get all the water they need to like water their crops. But the feature that backs up the water to allow that to happen could also be an amazing surf wave. So we've got wave hunters, but we also got people looking for these things that like might be a place to build a wave and all that kind of thing. Like when you're talking about, is there anything you can do to cultivate a wave? It's really hard to just go into a river, especially the river size that we need to like just like move rocks around. I get that question a lot. Like, can I
That's
just
why
Move the rock?
That's kind of what I pictured in my head, I have to say. I pictured in my head like me on my parents' property in West Virginia and Andre like with our boards, kind of like walking around and seeing, oh, that could almost be a wave if only it had some more like stones and sticks inside of it or something. I don't know.
You can, like, and it's like basic level. Like, I've done it. But you can only get so far. Like,
Okay.
typically, if you can move a rock, like with your hands, then the river's strong enough to move it as well. So you
Mhm.
might get something for an afternoon, and then you get a rainfall, and a little bit more water comes out, and it just flushes it away, right? So in the Kananaskis, the river that we're surfing, the wave that we're surfing, we built that wave. Like the community raised funds and went through all the government approvals, and we have actually built that from start to finish. It was a section of river where there was nothing, and we moved rocks, but it wasn't like sticks and stones. Like we have special machinery that like gets cleaned out so that it can go into a riverbed safely for the fish and the environment. And it's giant machinery that's moving these rocks, and we're looking for we get the rock come in from a local quarry, but we're trying to find stones that are like the size of a Volkswagen Beetle, like
Right.
something that's not going to move if we have like sort of these flood conditions, right? So it's got to kind of stick around long enough because this can cost hundreds of thousands of dollars. So we don't want to just like move some rocks around and then it gets washed away and then we have to rebuild it every few years, that kind of thing. So yeah, it is possible to like maybe cultivate a wave, but those conditions that you're looking for need to be there ahead of time. So if you do find a place with a drop, and it does look like there's sort of a wave there, I think you can like some of these wild waves, for example. One thing I'll say, like when we mentioned there's flow data for rivers, and that's kind of like reading the swell of these ocean waves. Excuse me, we're looking for it's measured in cubic feet per second or cubic meters per second if you're in Canada or the Commonwealth. But that's how much water is actually rushing under your feet when you're surfing. You need to have probably around 30 CMS, which is about 1,000 CFS. So that's like a certain size of a river. And if it's too small, like if it's more like a creek or just a smaller river, it's not going to have enough power to like float you. You know what I mean? Like there's just not enough physics under your feet. And that's where I've tried. Like I've moved my own rocks and it looks like a river wave. Like it's got all the shape it needs, but you go to stand up on your board and you just sink, right? There's just not enough there. So when you get bigger and bigger in the rivers, it gets harder and harder to find, like to still make that shape happen. But like in Munich, Germany, they've got their Eisbach wave that's very famous. It's like downtown. They've done adjustments there, or in the Kananaskis, we've definitely like we've built the big structure, but there's things that you can do moving like by hand some smaller rocks just to divert the water in a little bit of a different direction, and that can help, right? River levels raise and lower. So sometimes, if it's a really good wave one day, it might not be as good the next day. So you want to divert more water towards the wave. You could build like a little, like I used to do it as a kid. You just like kind of build a wall in the river, like you just pile up stones, and there's just more water that gets pushed around into the main channel where the wave is being formed. So there's things you can do to improve waves and play around with it, but it's very hard to like go from flat river to like having a wave. Like when you're, it just doesn't quite work. I wish it did.
Me too. It's just but that's why I wanted to talk about this, right? Because it's just super interesting. Everything about surfing is interesting if you surf, right?
Yeah.
But what has been my enjoyment throughout the podcast is finding these little or big kind of niche areas of surfing and then seeing that from the different perspective. So like even though I surf, right, I don't understand the dynamics of a river wave. So my thought about it was so much like kind of either one way or the other, either like I'm going to Munich and I'm going to surf that wave, or I'm going to, like an old timey, person out in the woods, like, well, that looks like a wave,
Hmm.
you know?
For sure, definitely.
But I'm curious. Sorry, what were you going to say?
Well, I would just like I would say like especially if we're looking in West Virginia, the I would gravitate more towards where these communities are sort of already happening,
Mm-hmm.
um, and not just like maybe not just put river surfing in your search, but like seek out kayakers and whitewater rafters and things like this, because there's already so much knowledge that's there that just I think today's sort of like hive mind or communal brain sort of exists in Instagram and maybe YouTube a little bit. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
So it's like if it's not on Instagram, it doesn't exist. But there's these communities who like have discovered these waves and know how to get in and out of them safely. That it just they're not promoting it, and a lot of wave hunters do a lot of this sort of in secret. There's still a lot of that happening. Like I know in Europe, they've been doing it a lot longer than we have, so they don't have that like beginner stoke where they're like, "I found a wave, everybody come surf it with me." They've got like these like hunting cams that are like posted in trees somewhere, and they're like,
Oh.
like getting a live update of if the wave's good or not, but they're not telling anyone. They're like kind of keeping it to themselves, like that old timey guy. Like that's sort of still in the culture, and I think a lot of these waves can be pretty dangerous, and there's almost like these sort of some of these wild waves you don't just want to take a beginner there. Like if you're still learning how to river surf, like even Munich can be really dangerous. Like it's not a place for beginners. Even like our Kananaskis wave, we don't suggest beginners start there. There's like the bunny hill at a ski hill. Like there's a
Yeah.
bunny wave like in town in Calgary where you can go and learn and pick up those skills. And it's not the surfing that the beginners need to learn to be able to get to a more advanced wave. It's the river awareness of like how to not stand up in a current. Like just putting your feet down in a fast moving river is extremely dangerous. So there's things that you need to learn for like these like foundational steps of like just to be comfortable in your environment, because in a river, it's similar to an ocean where like drowning is a hazard. Like
Mm-hmm.
if you're not prepared for it, that is a risk that you have to look at. But in a river, there's all these other risks that might not be associated with an ocean, for example. Like if you have a tree that has fallen into a river and the current doesn't stop, whereas an ocean wave kind of comes and sets. So there's a lull in a time, like if you were surfing at a reef break and you got tumbled, you went down, and your leash hooks onto a piece of coral or something, it's like caught up, right? And the swell is moving in a direction so that it's like kind of like got you caught, like you're not moving, and like that's, oh shit, there's something wrong, I'm hooked on something. You would just need to wait until there was a lull in the set, swim down and unhook that leash and swim up to the top. But in a river, the flow doesn't stop. There's no
Okay.
lull, right? So the best example, and this is unfortunately where most deaths happen, like this is the scariest thing, is if you have, we call them a strainer or a sweeper if it's on top of the water, but say you have a tree in a river and you get caught up in that tree, and the river's just pushing you against the tree with a force so strong that you can't fight back, you can't push back, right? Like you're sort of stuck. Like at that point you need a rescue. Like there's
Mm-hmm.
no sort of swimming out of it or getting out of it. So there's all these little things where it's like when you're going out to try and find these waves, like I would go out and try and find these communities. You know what I
Okay.
mean?
Instead of just going out by yourself.
Just like, hey, I could build a wave, or like that looks like a wave.
Yeah. I get that too. It's interesting how this I think that surf, at least these smaller surf communities, are kind of dealing with like, how do I manage that safety as more people find the information? It's the same thing as happening in the lake surfing, especially I think with COVID, just because people were getting out of the cities, moving into the not country, but into smaller areas by the lake. And seems like during COVID, a huge surge of freshwater surfers has happened, which is exciting and also dangerous because you get, people on the wrong boards, people in the wrong place. You got this kind of like oversharing of spots like that you were talking to. And so, there is something to be said about a barrier to entry in anything. Like, I know with big wave surfing, a lot of the original guys were so against those inflatable life jackets.
Mm-hmm.
They were so against it because they were so afraid that quote unquote regular dudes would just try and go out because of that safety net. So, I think that's a really good point to start looking into other things that already exist where you're located and then kind of expand from there.
I'd be interested to hear how, like, if we call it a barrier to entry, which I think is great, of like how it's happening in the lakes or in ocean communities where you've seen it in New Zealand or Florida, but like how or advice you give to someone from like how do you get from like riding shore break to like getting to like a more advanced spot or like one of those better spots, because in the river, like it sounds cliche, but like this idea of respect is a big one that comes out, but it's more and more we're seeing sort of like with Instagram, like a spot goes up and it's like, oh, that's a river surf spot. I know how to river surf because I can ride straight on the Kananaskis wave, so I should be able to surf there.
Mm-hmm.
And it's almost like a sort of sense of entitlement, which like is a thing that's kind of more prevalent in later generations, or maybe I'm getting old and like back in my day sort of thing. But it's almost like when you see a more advanced surfer surfing a more advanced wave, it's you don't see all the little pieces that they did or all the learnings and everything that they had to go through to get to that point. It's just you see the final product, and I don't know. So for us, it's kind of it's actually really difficult, and we're at sort of a transition period right now in the river surf community where I think beginners, or not just beginners, like everyone who's in river surfing is striving to do more, like to surf a bigger wave or find a bigger wave or like go out and do these bigger things, but they might not be ready for it. So
yeah, I think that the lake or freshwater surf community is dealing with that too, and it's different where you're at. Like depending on where you're at least from like I'm kind of like still half in that world and half out of that world. But what I see is when I see like Toronto's surf community is very close there because it's based around a city, right? So it's kind of like more centralized. Um, they kind of have like maybe a home base to kind of check in with. So whether it's Surf the Greats or Surf Ontario or there's one other shop there, it's kind of like a point of contact um to get started. And like for the most part, the barrier to entry is how do you get your equipment? So in order to get your equipment, you have to go to a shop for the most part for lake surfing, because it's not at that point yet. It almost is, but it's not quite at that point where you can go on Craigslist and find an 8-foot board, a 6 mil wetsuit that fits you, and all of that stuff that goes along with it, and just go on your merry way. Where what I see on the Lake Michigan side is it's more spread out. So there's shops, but they're kind of like dotted all along the lake. And what tends to happen is people kind of, each shop area cultivates its own sort of vibe,
yeah,
kind of like what you were saying, their own like surfer crews. And so the rules or the pecking order might be like a little bit different, or the way that people act might be different. Where then if you go all the way up north to the UP, it's pretty, there's a low amount of people that are surfing there, but at an extremely high level. So from my perspective, the danger becomes someone coming from maybe like Michigan or the Toronto surf scene who's had kind of the training, the base training, but then like you're saying, the entitlement to say, well, I'm just going to go up to Lake Superior, which is a totally different, it's Lake Superior is a very, very wild lake. Surfer Dan, has tons of stories about that. It can change really fast. It's super cold. So the danger kind of becomes, this was named on Lake Superior. I know that there's something happening up there. I'm going to go, and that's where the danger lies. So it's starting to kind of, unfortunately, what's happening is it what looks like a bunch of old crotchety guys telling the younger generation to respect them. That's not actually what it is. That's actually our last guy that we had on, Timothy Driscoll. He was kind of talking about that, about naming the spots. So their whole thought is that when you give a spot a name, like even in ocean surfing, Chopu or Jaws or whatever, then it becomes like something to check off your list, whether you're ready for that or not. And in a way, I mean, I believe in self-responsibility. So if you want to go to Lake Superior and get yourself into trouble, that's kind of your own business. But the issue becomes this overcrowded thing. And then probably same with river surfing. Then when a rescue happens, you're putting other people at danger to try and like help you out. So, yeah, it's an interesting kind of conundrum. I know in New Zealand it was very like, the setup where I was living was very like, you kind of go up the chain. And if you weren't ready at a spot, you damn sure would know as soon as you got out there. You would certainly know. And someone would nicely or not nicely help you get the hell out of there, you know? But I haven't seen, and I haven't quite seen that on the lakes. And it's kind of that tough balance between the two of them. So
Yeah, so I guess what I'm kind of picking up is like two things, is which we'd be interested to talk about, but I don't know if we have enough time to cover everything about surfing.
that's
Right?
true.
But like the surf shop sort of having, um, like, I don't know if it's a responsibility, but if they're the access point, or if they're the barrier to entry, then it's almost on them to sort of guide that experience for someone coming into it. Not even just from a beginner standpoint, but as they come back, it's kind of guiding that experience. And then this idea of like checking a wave off the list, which is a really great point. I got to listen to that podcast, go back and hear that one. I haven't listened to it yet, but this idea of just sort of being a surf tourist, I think, has come up a lot. But the difference between surfing sort of a local break where you have that community there, everyone's sort of looking out for one another, but just showing up at another spot and sort of not knowing the dangers, but also not knowing the people. Like you're saying, by putting yourself at risk, you're putting others at risk, because they now have to sort of watch out for you. And you're almost putting them in a position where they need to tell you about the dangers of that area, whereas they came into it in a way that they were ready for it, or they knew how to be prepared for that, or something like that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's also, I don't know, it's an interesting time in surfing, because um there is a movement of like, everybody surf and come and surf, and that's awesome. But there needs to be this other conversation too, that's like, if someone's yelling at you in the surf, there's a really good chance they're not just a piece of shit. Like, there's a really high chance that it's adrenaline, annoyance, and fear that is why that is coming out of them the way that it is. It happened to me about 2 weeks ago, and it kind of messed up my whole vibe, which it can, only because when I was surfing in New Zealand, I was hyper conscious of where I was at. So I was always sitting way outside, way away from the peak, outside and inside, right? So outside, away from the peak, and then kind of inside, so that when the set wave would come through, that would be mine. That's always almost always what I did, until I kind of got more comfortable and more close, and even throughout my session, right? So I would kind of work in this kind of U-shaped pattern around the inside and outside of the break as I kind of felt more comfortable and was reading the wave and stuff like that. And this 2 weeks ago, I was too big of a board, not paying attention to the current and not paying attention to the set waves. And I was right there with this guy. And he hit, we basically hit each other. And he was a really good surfer, like shredding on a very nice, one of the nicer waves of the day, right? But then also we collided, and that was my fault. And I'm not even exactly sure what he said to me, but it was something like, I think you're in the wrong place, or like, I think you're in the wrong spot or something. And it came out super mean. And I just was like, fuck, you know? So I went in and I kind of sat down, and then I just kind of started looking and watching the waves. And I think what needs to happen, or what should happen, is the conversation after the stoke. So it's like, it's good to be stoked. It's good to be a beginner and be into it. And if you're in the whitewash and someone gives you a hassle, that's their issue, because you're kind of just a beginner and you're in your own way. But I think, and I hope, that either at the surf shops or within people, they start to kind of have the conversation of like, hey, like, and this is dangerous because of X, Y, and Z, and something other than just a sign. Because I've been seeing lots of signs like, don't snake the wave and don't be here. That's for an intermediate surfer.
Yeah.
That's not for someone who's a beginner, or even like in between beginner and intermediate. Like, it just isn't.
They don't even know when they're snaking.
They don't even know when they're snaking. No, they don't.
Yeah.
And if someone is at the point where they're gonna snake a wave, there's a really good chance that they understand the risks, the rewards, the benefits, and also, like, there's a good chance that maybe they were watching the guy they're snaking the wave from, and he hasn't been catching every wave that he's tried for. So yeah, I don't know, that was a little long-winded, but
no, that's really good. Like, I've never heard, like, personally, I'm sure it's out there, but I never really heard anybody stand up for like the grumpy old local. And it should be like, that's great. Like, it's good to hear it in that light. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
In the way that you're putting it forward. And I don't think that that's the type of person who's having those maybe stoke conversations, or trying to grow surfing. I think they're very happy what they have, and they know it's special, and they're like happy to go out and do that on their own, and maybe not like broadcast to the world of how amazing surfing is. But it's too, like, if shops are the barrier to entry, they're also the ones that are trying to grow the sport, or anyone who's trying to like bring out friends, or get more people into it. It's almost like, as soon as you broadcast to the world or invite someone, that's where the responsibility lies. Like, if you bring somebody into it, you have to show them both sides, I guess.
Yeah.
But that's good. I think that conversation needs to be happening a lot more, because we're all like, shaka bra, yeah, let's do it. We're all surfers.
Yeah, well, I think so. I think the conversation needs to be had too, but I think, and I've talked in different, like, especially to California surfers, because in California, it's so, in my experience, super extreme and kind of like mean-spirited in this weird like frat bro kind of like picking on the nerd way.
Mm.
Which is cool, but it's not, and that's its own vibe, but it's not constructive. You know
Yeah.
what I mean? Like, it's not
Well,
constructive. And I think a lot of surfing is also, it's like kind of introspective.
mm.
So, you know, hopefully people can kind of start to see that, you know, that old bastard on the longboard, you know, he might have at least half of a point. And
Yeah. Oh,
I'm
yeah.
sure it's similar with the river waves too. I would imagine that there's kind of some, like you said, that guy who came and was kind of just being, he wasn't being dangerous, but he was kind of just being an ass. And it's kind of like, well,
Which can be dangerous as well.
that's true.
But
Yeah.
there's got to be like this sort of perfect harmony where everybody can get their own ride, and like you said, like staying in your sort of outside but inside, like in your you. Like there's got to be this like utopia of surfing in every surf break, where everything works totally smooth. And when you come into it, and you almost have to learn that. Like everybody's learning it at the same time. Like okay, now there's these kooks coming in, like how do I adjust? And like it's like this, I don't know, like anything you see in nature sort of thing. And like you said, like fear, adrenaline, like what was the third one? But it's just kind of like, oh, there's something, and I don't
Hmm.
really know how to react. Like it's almost it's happening on both sides, right?
Yeah. Yes, definitely. And I mean, there's also this, the aspect of like, um, we're all kind of, at least with ocean surfing, I can say that you kind of are always, there's so many variables. So you're always kind of like, okay, who's this person? What's their skill level? What's my, like, at least for me, that's one, my first, like, I forgot who it was that was, gave me this advice when I first started surfing, but he told me to take 3 shitty waves. So just take 3 shit waves and then find your place in the lineup. So that kind of gives you enough time to get a little warm up in, scope out the scene, and kind of, you know, get your footing, get your pop up right or whatever. And then you kind of start your session. So with that, you can kind of see like who's the grumpy old guy, where are the beginners, and how are they handling it? Are they just throwing their boards in the air? Are they, you know, do they know how to properly like wipe out? And and then who's actually going for waves? So
Totally.
who's actually going for waves and then making them, and then you can, you know, because not always, and I'm sure it's the same in river waves, not, it's not always the gearhead, right? It might just be some guy's a gearhead and he loves having boards. I'm kind of like that. I have tons of boards, and I'm, you know, I'm not an advanced surfer by any means, but you know, just because they have a whatever with these crazy fins doesn't mean that their place is higher than yours. So it's, it's a tough kind of conundrum, I think.
One point that you've made though that I think is really good advice for everyone everywhere is like when you said sort of when you got yelled at, you went, you paddled out, sat, watched, and like kind of watched the waves, and questioned where do I need to be. And this idea of like taking 3 shit waves, or just like starting your session with like getting used to your surroundings, like just stopping and looking. It's kind of like listening in a conversation, but you do it with your eyes, like read body language. Like it's not just looking, it's listening in a weird way. Like listening is the wrong word, but it has more meaning than looking. You know what I mean? Or really seeing, I guess, like the difference between looking and seeing. But in a river or ocean or lakes or anything, I think that sense of entitlement is going to get notched down a peg if you're looking at this experience of like where do I fit in,
Hmm.
then it's not just like, oh, I'm going to go check this wave off my list. It's okay, but then you get there, now start looking, what is this wave, like what is this that I've brought myself to, and like instead of just jumping in, like kind of like, and I think the surfers that are there, if you watch them even like 5 minutes, is going to go a long way. But like if you can sit and have the patience and sort of study it, that's going to help you immensely. Even for catching waves, it's just going to help you a lot more. So jumping in head first and like not getting good rides isn't helpful anyway. So like maybe just take that time, right?
Yeah, that, and the other thing I just want to say, just as it kind of came in my mind, is that the danger factor is so much different for these kind of like sub genres of surfing, like river surfing, lake surfing, any type of like more extreme forms of surfing. Because again, the same guy who told me about the three shit waves, I used to go out and absolutely ridiculous surf because I was just so like, when you're in the beginning and you're like, I'm just, because you don't even understand how much danger you're in because you have no concept of what it is. And he talked about like the first scare, like your first big scare. And he's like, yeah, everybody's a charger until they have their first like big scare. But the difference from what I've seen is that kind of what you were saying with river surfing. Like in river surfing, your first big scare can be like you stuck to a tree. I forgot what you called that, but like something there, and then you not being able to get out. With lake surfing, it can be you're the only person out, or it's you and your partner, and it's winter, and there's no one around to help you.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a big thing with where I'm saying just start looking for the communities out there instead of just like wave scouting and trying to find a wave. Because that's the thing when you learn in a wave at a wave park, there I think you take some things for granted, like that you could call 911 or that there's someone there. And like in a river, you're like, or at a river park, you're probably like in an urban center where like an ambulance could actually get to you. But as soon as you're at these wild wave spots, if you take that same mentality that, like, if you learn at Boise, for example, and then you go wave hunting, like, I don't think you realize it until you need it, and then maybe you don't have it when you need it. So yeah, that's interesting. It's got me freaked out now too. I hope we
Why?
finish with some Stoke stuff. Yeah.
Oh,
like,
yeah.
just realizing like that, like surfing can be dangerous. Like it does it does have some risks, and then like you have like some good years of like really like progressing hard and like improving your surfing. You stop thinking about sort of what can go wrong, I guess.
Well, that's true. And I think, I mean, it is, I guess, like heavy, but I think it's something that's important to talk about. And I think even hearing, someone that's listening to this, hopefully they're not like, oh, well, that was dark. Hopefully they're like, oh, I'm empowered by this information about what can happen, because the more you know, the better informed, even if your skill set isn't, to a certain degree, having the information can help you be a better surfer and to also help other people be safer and in a better kind of position as well. So, one last thing I wanted to talk about is kind of the difference, and you kind of just spoke about it a little bit, but the difference between the cruise or the surf vibes at a paid park versus these kind of maybe free places, or just like wild waves, but wild waves that are kind of known.
Yeah. So one thing is like the river wave parks aren't paid. Like
Okay.
yeah, so they have these like a sort of like the Kelly Slater pool, like the wave pool. So they have like wave pools for standing waves, and they have like these pumps that will like shoot like jet streams of water, so they can create a river wave. Those are paid to use, and there's an interesting thing in the river surf community that there's a lot of surfers are saying like that's like really counter to what surfing is. Like I'm sure in ocean surfing world as well, like the environmental aspect of like creating carbon emissions to produce waves is like a no for some people. So that exists in the river surf world. And it's really popular in Europe. The technology's been around in Europe a lot longer. So they have like a world tour that has like, I forget how many spots, but like, and they're getting kids into it, which is amazing, and everything else. So I can definitely speak to that, because there's something really weird of like paying $1 a minute for your surf, and like it's gone up since I did it, but it was like I had in my head it was $1 a minute, so I paid the $30 for 30 minutes, and like every minute counts. And it's this weird thing in your head of like, I got to get the most out of this. And I think people, like if there was a crew, or like the people who are surfing in that pool, are very sort of like, they don't fool around as much, I guess. Like it's sort of like athlete in training, and
Okay.
it's interesting. It's cool. And then the staff who like surf for free, they'll goof around, and it's great because they almost have to, and they almost like go to the next level. Like I have a friend who's working in Austria at one of these right now, and he'll like, throw on a Speedo and like jump in or do tandem surf. It's like you almost got to cut the tension a bit, which is really interesting. And I think that's an important part of surfing. Like you gotta get out of your head every once in a while too, because like you say, it's very introspective, but you can almost get lost in like being a little too focused. Like, so in the lineup I'll try and sing a song or something like that, just to shake the funk and be like, oh yeah, remember we're doing this because it's fun. Like just the natural roar of being fun. And yeah, so the community around these wild waves is really interesting too, because they're usually outside of an urban center. So like everyone who's there has traveled to there. So there's not really any local spots, which makes it's almost like this weird family reunion vibe. It's fitting that you're at a family reunion, like
that is very fitting. Full
but
circle.
There's people that I surf with, like every springtime, that like every year I surf with these people, and like we live like 10, 15 hours apart, and like that's the only time I see them. So it does almost have a community, and it's got this like community spirit and community vibe, but like I don't even know where they're living, or like when we get together we have like endless chats. Like we sit around a campfire usually because we're like camping. We'll like chat about fins or boards or like waves or all this stuff, and then like I don't know anything about them. It's kind of like you just have surfing that is the bond that ties you together, and I almost really like it. Like that's where, for me at least, I feel like I'm most myself. Like I don't have to like pretend to fit into some society like at my 9 to 5 job kind of thing. Like I really feel at home, and I get the sense that everyone there kind of feels that, which is really nice. Yeah,
That's awesome. Well, I think that's a really good place to kind of.
That lightened my mood. That was good.
Yeah, me too. I feel like that's awesome. How do you feel?
Yeah, I feel great.